Walmart has quietly stopped placing orders for a dozen food items, and almost nobody knows it's happening. There was no public announcement, no press release, and no notice posted in stores. For most shoppers, the first sign will come when they reach for a product they've been buying for years only to discover it has quietly disappeared. At first glance, nothing seems unusual. The shelves are still stocked, the aisles still appear full, and the store looks exactly as it always has. But behind the scenes, certain products have been removed from Walmart's ordering system without any explanation, leaving customers unaware until they can't find the items they rely on. So far, 12 different foods have already been scaled back or quietly dropped. Most people won't notice the change immediately because similar products are still sitting on the shelves. The real impact comes later, when prices on the remaining options begin to rise and the familiar brands or varieties people count on are nowhere to be found. In this countdown, we're covering all 12 items, beginning with the least obvious and working our way to the number one food. Number 12. Breakfast cereal. Walk to the cereal aisle and take a slow look across the shelves. Everything appears completely normal. The familiar brands are all there. Cheerios, Frosted Flakes, Lucky Charms, Cinnamon Toast. Crunch, lined up in bright, colorful boxes that make it seem as though nothing has changed. But that's exactly what makes this so easy to miss. The biggest changes aren't happening on the outside of the package. They're happening inside. The grocery industry has a name for this practice: shrinkflation. Instead of raising the sticker price, manufacturers quietly reduce the amount of cereal inside the box. In many cases, the package itself barely changes, so shoppers naturally assume they're getting the same amount they always have. Only later do they realize a box that once lasted an entire week is suddenly empty by Thursday. It's not because anyone in the family is eating larger bowls. It's because there's simply less cereal in every package. At the same time, another quiet shift is taking place. Food companies are eliminating cereal varieties that no longer make financial sense to produce. Certain flavors disappear without warning. Familiar package sizes quietly vanish, and products that have been on the shelf for years suddenly stop appearing in store orders. One week, your favorite cereal is exactly where it's always been. A few weeks later, that space has been replaced by a different product, or it's sitting empty altogether. Manufacturers have been facing growing financial pressure as the costs of grain, sugar, packaging materials, and transportation continue to rise. Rather than spreading those higher costs across every product, many companies are choosing to focus on their highest-selling cereals while gradually discontinuing slower-moving varieties. Public financial reports from major cereal producers, including General Mills, have highlighted softer sales and tighter profit margins, and some Cheerios varieties have already been phased out as part of those efforts. Today, a typical box of cereal often sells for around $4 to $6, while family size or premium varieties can easily cost $5 to $8 or even more, depending on the store. The practical takeaway is straightforward. If your household regularly eats a particular cereal and you find it at a genuinely good price, consider buying an extra 2 or 3 boxes. Keep them in a cool, dry place, and once opened, transfer the cereal into airtight containers to help preserve freshness. Number 11. Canned tropical fruit. This is one of those grocery items that most shoppers barely notice. Cans of pineapple, mandarin oranges, fruit cocktail, or peaches packed in syrup rarely become the focus of a shopping trip. They usually end up in the cart only because a recipe calls for them, or because they're a staple ingredient in a favorite family dish. They're background purchases, the kind of products people assume will always be there. Ironically, that's exactly why they're worth paying attention to. When retailers begin reducing inventory, the changes don't usually start with the products everyone watches. If ground beef, eggs, or milk suddenly disappear, shoppers notice immediately, and the news spreads fast. But when less prominent items begin shrinking, almost nobody notices. There are no headlines, no rush to the stores, and no obvious warning signs. Instead, the selection quietly becomes smaller, one product at a time, until the exact item you've always relied on is no longer available. Take canned pineapple as an example. The familiar can of pineapple chunks may not appear on store shelves as consistently as it once did. Larger cans are often the first to disappear. Mid-priced brands gradually give way to premium alternatives, and certain varieties quietly leave the product lineup without any announcement. At first glance, the shelf still looks well stocked, but the dependable option you've bought for years becomes much harder to find. Several factors are contributing to that trend. Much of the world's canned tropical fruit is processed through manufacturing networks in Southeast Asia, making these products heavily dependent on international supply chains. Every can also requires aluminum, and the cost of that material has climbed significantly in recent years. Add higher shipping and transportation expenses, and the total cost continues to move upward throughout the supply chain. At the moment, most canned tropical fruit sells for roughly $1.50 to $2.50 per can. If those production and transportation costs remain elevated, it's easy to imagine many of those products gradually moving into the $2.50 to $4 price range. A practical approach is to keep a modest supply of the varieties your family actually uses. Whether that's pineapple, mandarin oranges, peaches, or fruit cocktail, having 4 to 8 cans in regular rotation gives you flexibility without overbuying. Use the oldest cans first and replace them as you shop. Number 10. Frozen vegetables. Take a walk through the frozen food section, and at first glance, everything seems perfectly normal. Bright freezer cases are packed from top to bottom with bags of broccoli, peas, carrots, green beans, mixed vegetables, and stir-fry blends. It still feels like one of the few parts of the grocery store that hasn't really changed, giving shoppers the impression that supply is as strong as ever. But that's where the illusion begins. The frozen vegetable aisle doesn't have to develop empty shelves before something is changing. In many cases, the first warning sign is much more subtle. Instead of looking at how many bags are available, pay attention to how many different choices remain. Maybe a vegetable that once came in small, medium, and family-size bags is now offered in only one size. A frozen vegetable blend that used to be available as a budget option, a standard version, and an organic version may now only be sold in the premium package. Store-brand family-size bags, the ones many households rely on for several dinners throughout the week, often appear less consistently than they did a year or two ago. From the end of the aisle, the freezers still look completely stocked. But when you move closer, you may notice that the exact product your family has purchased for years is missing. The shelves appear full, yet the selection has quietly become much narrower. That doesn't always mean stores are dealing with a shortage. In many cases, it's the result of deliberate business decisions. As the costs of vegetables, cold storage, labor, packaging, and transportation continue to increase, manufacturers often concentrate on products that generate the highest profit margins. Lower-priced family-size bags are frequently the first to disappear, while premium or organic products remain because they provide a better financial return. Forecasts for 2026 have pointed to continued increases in fresh vegetable prices, and frozen vegetables are affected by many of the same agricultural conditions. When harvests are reduced in major growing regions such as California or Florida because of weather or lower yields, both the fresh and frozen markets feel the impact. Today, most frozen vegetable bags sell for around $2 to $3, depending on the variety and brand. If current production and transportation pressures continue, seeing many popular products move into the $3.50 to $5 range would not be surprising. Number 9. Peanut butter. There's a pattern that repeats itself whenever beef prices begin climbing. It doesn't require a marketing campaign or a public announcement. It simply happens naturally in grocery stores across the country, regardless of income level or location. As the cost of meat increases, more shopping carts slowly make their way toward the peanut butter aisle. There's a simple reason for that. Peanut butter remains one of the most affordable and efficient sources of protein available in almost any supermarket. It can become a quick sandwich, a spoonful paired with fruit, or an easy breakfast that requires no cooking at all. A single jar can help replace several meals that might otherwise rely on far more expensive protein, making it an attractive choice for families trying to stretch their grocery budget. That shift in buying habits is already becoming noticeable. Larger family-sized jars are often the first to disappear from shelves, while natural and reduced sugar varieties tend to sell faster than many standard options. Smaller jars usually remain available longer, but the larger containers that value-conscious shoppers depend on often move through inventory more quickly than stores can replace them. When millions of households begin choosing the same lower-cost protein at roughly the same time, demand can increase much faster than production is able to respond. Peanut farming and processing have practical limits, and the supply chain cannot expand overnight. Once enough shoppers start reaching for the same products simultaneously, pricing pressure naturally follows. Today, a typical jar of peanut butter generally costs between $3 and $5. If demand continues to grow while packaging, manufacturing, and transportation expenses remain elevated, it's reasonable to expect many popular products to move closer to the $5 to $7 range over time. But the price tag isn't necessarily the most important thing to watch. A more meaningful signal appears when the exact jar your family has always purchased quietly changes. The package looks almost identical, the price stays about the same, yet there's less peanut butter inside. That's often the moment shrinkflation has fully reached your pantry. A practical approach is to keep 2 extra jars of the variety your household regularly eats and rotate them using a first-in, first-out system. Since peanut butter has a long shelf life and is something many families use consistently, those backup jars are likely to be used anyway. Number 8. Bananas and avocados. Here's a simple question. Do you remember exactly how much you paid for bananas the last time you went grocery shopping? Most people don't. It isn't because they're ignoring their budget. It's because bananas have been such a dependable, low-cost purchase for so many years that most shoppers stopped paying attention to the price altogether. You walk through the produce department, grab a bunch almost out of habit, place it in your cart, and keep moving. Avocados often follow the same pattern. Many people pick up one or two without giving the price much thought, especially when they usually fall somewhere around $1 to $1.50 each. That sense of routine is precisely what makes the recent changes so easy to overlook. Bananas sold in the United States largely arrive through supply chains connected to countries such as Costa Rica and Colombia, while most avocados come from Mexico. Because these products depend on international production and transportation, they're especially vulnerable to weather events, shipping delays, higher freight costs, and changes at border crossings. A storm in a growing region or even a slowdown in transportation can tighten supplies much faster than most shoppers realize. At many Walmart stores today, bananas are still priced at roughly 54 to 58 cents per pound, while avocados often sell for around $1 to $1.50 each. On the surface, those prices don't seem particularly concerning. The more interesting changes are happening quietly. The banana display may be slightly smaller than it was a couple of years ago. Finding perfectly ripe avocados often takes a little more searching than it once did. Prices have gradually crept upward a few cents at a time, and because the increases happened so slowly, most shoppers adapted without ever making a conscious decision to change their habits. Instead of buying 3 avocados, many people now grab only 2. A large bunch of bananas quietly becomes a smaller one. Weekend guacamole gets made a little less often, or with fewer avocados than before. Nobody announces that they're cutting back. The adjustment simply happens. That's an important signal. When shopping habits begin changing before people even realize they're making different choices, price has already influenced behavior. Since both bananas and avocados are fresh foods, buying large quantities usually isn't the best strategy. Ripe bananas can be sliced and frozen for smoothies, baking, or oatmeal, helping reduce waste. Ripe avocados can be mashed with a little lemon or lime juice and stored in the refrigerator for a day or two, making them easier to use before they spoil. Number 7. Olive oil. At first glance, the olive oil section doesn't seem any different than it used to. The shelves are lined with green and amber bottles in a variety of sizes and brands, giving the impression that everything is fully stocked. But take a closer look. Try finding the familiar mid-sized bottle at a reasonable mid-range price. That's often where the selection has quietly become much smaller. Instead of several affordable choices, you may find yourself choosing between a small bottle with a high price per ounce or a premium brand that costs considerably more than many households expect to spend on a basic pantry staple. The middle of the market, the options that once offered the best balance of value and price, is gradually disappearing. The reasons go far beyond the grocery store. Most of the world's olive oil is produced in southern Europe, particularly in Spain, Italy, and Greece. Over the past several years, those regions have experienced repeated droughts, record-breaking heat, and difficult growing conditions that have reduced olive harvests. With less oil being produced, global supplies have tightened. On top of that, higher shipping and transportation costs have added even more pressure before the bottles ever reach store shelves. The price increases reflect those challenges. Compared with 2022, olive oil prices in the United States have roughly doubled. Today, a standard bottle at many Walmart locations typically costs somewhere between $10 and $16. If future Mediterranean harvests remain weak, seeing many bottles climb into the $14 to $22 range would be consistent with ongoing supply pressures. For many families, olive oil has already reached an important tipping point. People aren't necessarily buying less because they've stopped wanting to use it or because they've changed their cooking habits for health reasons. They're buying less because the cost has reached a level that no longer fits comfortably into the weekly grocery budget. When enough shoppers respond the same way, retailers tend to adjust their product mix. They focus on stocking the bottles that sell the fastest, reduce the number of mid-priced options, and quietly discontinue slower-moving sizes without drawing much attention to the change. Number 6. Canned tuna. Canned tuna has always been one of those dependable pantry staples that asks very little from you. It doesn't need refrigeration until it's opened, it has a long shelf life, and it provides a convenient source of complete protein whenever you need a quick meal. Open a can, make a sandwich with a couple of slices of bread, and lunch is ready in just a few minutes. That combination of convenience, nutrition, affordability, and long storage life is exactly why canned tuna has earned a place in pantries across households of every income level. It's also why the changes happening in this category deserve attention. At first glance, the tuna section still appears well stocked. There are plenty of cans on the shelf, so it doesn't seem like anything unusual is happening. But if you pay closer attention, a different pattern begins to emerge. Many of the dependable mid-priced brands aren't showing up as consistently as they once did. Instead, shoppers are increasingly finding two extremes: the lowest cost products on one end and premium varieties with noticeably higher price tags on the other. The familiar middle ground, the brand that offered reliable quality at a reasonable price, is becoming harder to count on. This is one of the quiet ways a product category changes without looking empty. The shelves remain full, the bargain products are still there, and the premium options haven't disappeared. What slowly fades away are the everyday choices that many families relied on the most. Several factors are contributing to that shift. Global tuna fisheries continue to face supply challenges, while every can requires aluminum, a material that has become significantly more expensive. Much of the world's canned seafood is also processed through facilities in Southeast Asia, making it sensitive to shipping costs, fuel prices, tariffs, and international transportation delays. When all of those expenses increase at the same time, even a small can of tuna becomes more costly to produce and distribute. Today, a standard can of tuna typically sells for around $1.50 to $2. If aluminum prices, transportation costs, and import expenses remain elevated, it's not difficult to imagine many products moving into the $2.50 to $3.50 price range in the near future. Number 5. Eggs. Most people can still remember that moment vividly. They walked up to the refrigerated egg case and found empty metal racks, handwritten purchase limits, and signs allowing only one carton per customer. Eggs, normally one of the most common and affordable sources of protein in the American diet, suddenly became one of the hardest grocery items to find. At the time, many shoppers assumed it was a temporary disruption that would soon be forgotten. But the reality is more complicated. The factors that created those shortages haven't completely disappeared. They've simply become less noticeable. Today's shelves are no longer empty, yet many of the warning signs remain if you know where to look. Larger cartons are often the first to sell out. The lowest-priced eggs tend to disappear early in the week, while cage-free, organic, and specialty varieties may not always be available consistently. The refrigerator case still appears full, but the confidence that you'll always find the exact carton you came for isn't quite as strong as it used to be. One of the biggest reasons is that the egg industry continues to deal with the effects of highly pathogenic avian influenza. When the virus reaches a commercial egg farm, large numbers of laying hens often have to be removed to prevent further spread. Rebuilding those flocks takes months, meaning supply cannot recover overnight even after an outbreak ends. At the same time, demand hasn't slowed. As beef, chicken, seafood, and other protein sources become more expensive, more households naturally turn to eggs because they're quick to prepare, relatively affordable, and work for breakfast, lunch, or dinner. For many seniors, individuals living alone, and families carefully managing a grocery budget, eggs aren't simply one protein choice among many. They're often the most practical option. Government food price data has consistently shown that eggs are among the most volatile items in the grocery store, with prices capable of changing rapidly whenever supply becomes tight. Today, a dozen large eggs at many Walmart locations typically cost between $4 and $6, although prices can climb even higher in areas experiencing regional supply shortages. Larger 18-count cartons often disappear before standard dozens, and store-brand eggs usually sell out ahead of higher-priced national brands. Number 4. Ground beef. Ground beef isn't a luxury item or a specialty product that only a few shoppers buy. It's one of the most common ingredients in American kitchens. It becomes hamburgers on the weekend, tacos during a busy week, spaghetti with meat sauce, a pot of chili, meatloaf, casseroles, and countless other family meals. Across nearly every income level and in every part of the country, it's a staple that millions of households depend on. That's exactly why the changes surrounding ground beef matter so much. Most people don't think of ground beef as something connected to supply chain problems. But behind the scenes, those pressures have been building for quite some time. Consider the experience of a warehouse inventory coordinator named Derek, who monitors refrigerated deliveries at a regional distribution center. His responsibility is straightforward. Compare the number of cases that stores are scheduled to receive with the number that actually arrives. For ground beef, those numbers gradually stopped matching. Beginning roughly a year earlier, incoming shipments repeatedly fell short of expectations. Instead of receiving every case that had been ordered, fulfillment rates frequently dropped into the 65 to 70% range. In practical terms, if the system requested 100 cases of ground beef, only about 65 to 70 would actually arrive. An occasional short shipment isn't unusual in logistics. But when the same pattern continues week after week, it starts pointing to something much larger than a temporary transportation problem. It becomes evidence of tightening supply throughout the production chain. The reasons extend well beyond any individual supplier. According to USDA cattle inventory data released in early 2026, the U.S. beef cow herd had declined to roughly 27.6 million head, marking its lowest level since 1961. Years of herd reductions have left fewer breeding cows, resulting in fewer calves entering the production system and a smaller future supply of beef. Additional disruptions affecting cattle imports from Mexico have added even more pressure to an already strained market. At many Walmart stores, ground beef currently sells for around $6.50 to $7 per pound. If herd numbers continue shrinking at a similar pace, prices reaching $8 to $9 per pound before the end of 2026 would be consistent with the current supply outlook. There's another important consequence that often receives less attention. As beef becomes more expensive, families naturally begin replacing it with alternatives such as chicken, pork, frozen meats, and other affordable proteins. When millions of households make that adjustment simultaneously, demand shifts toward those products as well, placing additional pressure on their prices and availability. In other words, the strain doesn't remain isolated to beef. It gradually spreads throughout the entire protein market. Number 3. Dark chocolate and cocoa. At first glance, the chocolate aisle doesn't appear to have changed at all. The shelves are still filled with candy bars, chocolate chips, baking chocolate, and plenty of familiar brands. Most shoppers walk right past without giving it a second thought because everything seems fully stocked. But the real change isn't in the amount of chocolate on the shelves. It's in the type of chocolate that's becoming harder to find. Products made with relatively small amounts of cocoa, such as many milk chocolate candy bars with long ingredient lists, are generally still easy to buy. The items facing the greatest pressure are those that rely on a much higher percentage of real cocoa. Dark chocolate containing more than 60% cacao, unsweetened cocoa powder, and high-quality chocolate chips with substantial cocoa solids are gradually becoming less consistent in both availability and price. For households that bake regularly, those changes are becoming easier to notice. The ingredients that have long been used for homemade brownies, birthday cakes, cookies, and other family favorites aren't disappearing overnight, but the selection is becoming narrower and the prices continue to climb. From across the aisle, everything still looks normal. Up close, however, experienced bakers often find fewer choices than they used to. The driving force behind this trend is the global cocoa market. Roughly 70% of the world's cocoa is produced in West Africa. Over the past several growing seasons, drought, extreme heat, and crop diseases have significantly reduced harvests across some of the region's most important cocoa-producing areas. As supplies tightened, global cocoa prices rose dramatically, more than 130% above 2023 levels. That's far more than a temporary seasonal fluctuation. It represents a major increase in the cost of the primary ingredient used to make chocolate products. When the raw material becomes that much more expensive, manufacturers and retailers tend to respond in predictable ways. They continue stocking their highest-selling mainstream products, reduce the number of premium varieties, and gradually eliminate higher cocoa items that are more expensive to produce and appeal to a smaller group of customers. Today, a typical chocolate bar often costs between $3 and $6, while containers of baking cocoa powder generally sell for around $5 to $8. If cocoa harvests remain under pressure, products with the highest cocoa content are likely to experience the greatest and most sustained price increases. Number 2. Coffee. Coffee rarely vanishes in a dramatic way. You won't usually walk into the store and find an empty coffee aisle. The shelves remain full, familiar brands are neatly stacked in rows, and the aroma of roasted coffee still fills that section of the store. At first glance, everything appears exactly as it always has. The difference only becomes obvious when you start looking for the coffee you actually buy. You reach for your favorite roast, the bag size you've purchased for years, or the blend your household drinks every morning, and it's gone. You check the space beside it, expecting to find another package, but that option has disappeared too. What's left is often either the lowest-priced variety or premium brands carrying much higher price tags. The dependable mid-range choices have quietly become much harder to find. This is one of the most subtle forms of supply reduction because nothing about the aisle looks alarming. There are no empty shelves, no purchase limits, and no signs warning about shortages. Instead, shoppers are simply offered fewer choices while the shelves continue looking completely stocked. The story begins far from the grocery store. Brazil produces roughly 40% of the world's coffee, making it the single largest supplier on the global market. During 2024 and 2025, major Arabica growing regions experienced severe drought, placing significant stress on the crops that produce the beans used in many higher-quality coffee blends. Some production estimates suggested harvest declined by as much as 35% in the hardest-hit areas. When the world's largest coffee producer experiences a harvest reduction of that magnitude, the effects spread throughout the entire supply chain. Manufacturers and retailers respond in predictable ways. They prioritize the products that sell the fastest, while slower-moving specialty roasts, seasonal blends, and less common package sizes are gradually removed from regular inventory. The coffee aisle still looks full, but the variety available to shoppers slowly becomes more limited. According to data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, coffee prices increased by roughly 33% year-over-year in early 2026. At many Walmart locations, a popular bag of coffee now sells for approximately $12 to $18. If weather-related production issues, transportation expenses, and other supply chain costs remain elevated, seeing many brands reach $16 to $24 per bag before the end of 2026 would be a reasonable possibility. Number 1. Milk and dairy creamer. Before emails are checked, before the television comes on, before the first conversation of the day begins, millions of people across America follow the exact same routine. They brew a cup of coffee, open the refrigerator, and reach for something to pour into it. A splash of milk, half and half, heavy cream, or the same flavored coffee creamer they've been buying for years. It's such a familiar habit that most people never stop to think about it. That quiet morning ritual is exactly why milk and dairy creamer take the #1 spot on this list. When a product becomes so woven into everyday life that you barely notice you're using it, even a small change can have an outsized impact. The moment your favorite creamer isn't on the shelf, or the carton you've always bought has quietly become smaller, you suddenly realize how much you depended on something you never expected to change. And those kinds of changes are becoming increasingly common. The dairy industry is dealing with rising costs across